So the last time we spoke about 5 different standards for evaluating personality theories. I finished that part of this talk. In this video, we will discuss different, very interesting topics connected to personality psychology and how we can possibly approach research in the field of personality psychology. And first of all, we should speak about sources of data. Each personality psychologist who wants to conduct research, do the measurement in the field, should have sources of data which they use for that purpose. There are several possible sources of data which personality psychologists can use in their research or practice. The first, the most simple one, is just self-report data, the information that the person reveals about themselves. So first of all, we can ask people some questions about themselves, and usually people actually can tell us a lot of interesting information about themselves, including all aspects of personality we could possibly be interested in. So you can ask some unstructured, open-ended questions like, tell me about the parties you like the most, or can you please tell me about your school years, or what do you like at university, or something like that. Or structured, where you basically ask very specific question and the person just needs to answer true or false. For example, I like loud and crowded parties. Answer is a true or false. Right? The problem with self-report data are also happen. So first of all, it might be not very effective if people not willing to share the information, right? It's self-obvious, but some people don't want to answer your questions and they don't want to reveal anything about their personality due to different reasons. Probably they're just not motivated, or they don't trust you as a researcher or practitioner, or they have doubts should they share some information, would it be like too personal, so they just might be not interested in that. And the second problem is that not all people really self-reflective. So people vary in their ability to reflect on themselves, and they have very different background in thinking about their own life and trying to be aware what's happening with their life. So some people tend to be naturally more reflective and they often think about what happens in their life. They might have a diary and write everything there and analyze their past experiences and behaviors, while other people might be much more impulsive and they just don't like to think about that at all. So if a person lacks this knowledge about themselves, they obviously cannot share it with you as a researcher or practitioner. So that is why psychologists in general and personality psychologists in particular also use different sources of data for their research practice. The second source of data is observer data. Again, the idea is super simple. You ask other people what do they know and think about the person you're interested in, right? So you can ask family members, friends, school teachers, and just co-workers, for example, about the person you're interested in. And they actually can tell you a lot of information that might be very different from self-reporting. Obviously, it happens because how we view ourselves and how other people perceive us not often coincide. So, and often not coincide at all, but for some people it might be more consistent. So those observers we can use can be professional observers. So, for example, other psychologists as well, or it can be casual observers. People just, share some experiences with the person we're interested in. So the main limitation of this source of data, which can be quite reliable and valuable for research and practice, is that not all psychological variables are observable, right? So, for example, we cannot see what the person thinks. We cannot see what the person feels, right? We can observe behaviors and activities. Sometimes the consequences of different life choices, task solving and problem solving, but only when we see the result already. So if you want to study, for example, values or motivation, it would be quite complicated or nearly impossible to study it relying only on observer data, right? So it will involve a lot of speculation, what other people think about the possible motivations of that person. So that is why we also, as a personality psychologist, we use the third source of data, which is called test data. Probably the most classical in psychology and first which comes to mind when you think about practice and research. The basic idea, again, is quite simple. Psychologists develop specific measurement procedures, which are called tests, and they're aimed to measure different psychological variables, such as, for example, personality traits, motivation, values, or something else. We just give those tests to a person, and after they fill all those tests, we calculate the overall result and learn something about their personality. So tests are good because we control the context where we give those tests and how we measure. And tests help us to test specific hypotheses. So, right, we can ask a question. How many people are extroverted or introverted in this academic group of university students, right? So, for example, we can think that put forward hypothesis that there are more extroverts in this classroom. With standardized tests, we actually can measure it and prove it right or wrong quite easily after a couple of tests on extroversion or introversion. But unfortunately, this source of data also has quite a few limitations. The first one, some participants, people who've been willing to complete the tests you give to them, might try to guess what trait is being measured and alter their responses on purpose. Sorry. So the idea is that they want to seem different from who they really are due to really different reasons. Maybe they want to impress you, or maybe they somewhat feel guilt or shame about their true personality, or they just don't want to be open and they want to seem more mysterious. And that's why they might alter responses. And sometimes intelligent participants can crack the idea behind the test and manipulate the overall final result. Also, there is difficulty in verifying that the research participants define the testing situations the same way as experimenter. So it's a problem of communication. Sometimes experimenter gives a test to participant and tells the instructions and tries to answer questions. But sometimes still participant might get a wrong idea about how they actually should fill the test, how they should respond, how much time it takes, and what is expected from them. And some people might be shy to ask additional questions. Some people are too self-confident to ask additional questions. They think they understood everything correctly, but it was a miscommunication with experimenter. So due to different reasons, the experimenter and participant can understand differently what is expected from participant, and it might influence test results. And finally, it's also connected. So results of this data also depend on the quality of communication between experimenter and participant. So sometimes participants have some additional, and experimenters have additional motivations from the situations. For example, participant finds experimenter attractive, and they actually don't want to fill the test, but they're interested in dating, and they accept invitation to participate in experiment because of the said fact, and they're trying to build communication, which leads to a date, for example, right? It completely changes the overall situations of testing and influence overall results. So sometimes it happens. Sometimes it happens because like experimenter and participant don't get along quite well. And naturally, we cannot like all the people, and some why communication can be built based on false impression, misunderstanding, or like antipathy. So that's why interpersonal communication is a very important factor, which actually affects getting test data, even if the test itself is like almost perfect. And the final source of data which personality psychologists use is life outcome data. So basically, we also can get some factual information about our participants. For example, we can get their grade point average from their university, or we can get their credit scores, or we can get some data about their parking fines or the medical information, right? So it's all type of information about the history of life of a person, which we can legally use into research. And we can compare these life events with different personality traits or other variables which we're interested in. And basically, the idea is when we try to predict life events based on personality traits we measure in different metrics. So the main purpose is, for example, develop procedure. We know that extroverted people will be more prone to that, and their life will go that way, and we can predict it. And introverted people are prone to that, and their life will go that way, and we can predict it. So we can compare those sources of data, and if we see correlations, we can possibly make a prediction in the future, which is actually very valuable for any type of scientist and personality psychologist in particular. So with those four sources of data, again, self-report data, observer data, test data, and life outcome data, we need to go further. Okay, so we have a data. What next? Right? We need to assess different personality characteristics, but it's connected with a couple of major problems. So the first, when we use two or more data sources, for example, self-report and observer, or observer and test data, within a single personality study, what are the links among the various sources of personality data? So, for example, we measure extroversion through tests, techniques, and we measure extroversion through self-report techniques. Would they show the same information, or they will contradict each other? It's the first problem. The second problem involves fallibility of personality measurements and how the use of multiple data sources can correct some of the problems associated with the single data sources. So sometimes our measurement techniques can be connected with some errors, so they're not fully error prone. And again, it creates additional problems for personality assessments. These are two key issues in this topic. So what we know about the links between data sources, so trying to tackle the first problem. So actually agreement across different data sources tend to be either low or moderate. So there is a lot of disagreement between sources. So again, returning to the example I provided you with a couple of minutes ago, if we measure extroversion through tests and self-report, basically the agreement would be either low or moderate. Though some traits a bit more, let's say, observable. For example, the same example with extroversion, it's really easier to track extroverted people and introverted people based on their behavior because it's much more clear. It is much more clear, but some personality traits, for example, being calculative, is really hard to observe. And thus, the difference between self-report and, for example, observer data would be much bigger. So the main idea is that if the trait of personality is more observable and clear, the agreement between measures would be higher. If the personality characteristic trait or variable is less observable, the agreement between different sources of data probably would be moderate or even low. A major issue in evaluating linkages among the sources of personality data is whether the sources are viewed as alternative measures of the same construct. For example, different measures of extroversion and introversion, or as assessments of different phenomena. For example, measurement of extroversion and measurement of openness to a new experience, right? So the lack of agreement between sources of data doesn't necessarily signify an error in measurement. Sometimes it might be caused by the different reason. Strong agreement, on the other hand, between two or more sources of information, we had sources of data, can lead to confidence that, yes, everything is okay, that it's alternative measurements of the same construct. Lack of strong agreement means that there are some problems. Maybe data we use assess not the same phenomena as we hypothesized, but rather different phenomena. So we, as researchers and practitioners, always should be very cautious when we get data from different sources and we compare it on the matter of agreement between the sources of information. So when we try to evaluate personality measures, okay, so we have different measurement techniques of how we measure different personality traits, characteristics, and variables in personality. We evaluate those measures by like three different standards. The first one is reliability, the second is validity, and the third one is generalizability. And you probably know about those standards from the course of research methods in psychology. But here, if we apply it to personality psychology exactly, we still need to repeat some information you already have from the research methods course and add some meat to the bones with additional information which would be useful for you before you will start reading some exact theories in the field of personality psychology. So we will start with reliability. So reliability can be defined as the degree to which an obtained measure represents the true level of the trait being measured. So the basic idea is when you measure something, several times, you should expect to receive the same result each time. If we're speaking about, for example, measuring height or weight, right? You can make several measurements and you think that you should get the same result each time, right? So if you see the different weight in kilograms or pounds each time you stand on scales, you start to think that those scales are unreliable or broken, right? To some extent, it's applicable for personality psychology and different measurements techniques, though reliability in general would be a bit lower compared to physical measurement due to the nature of psychological phenomena, which are much more like fluid compared to physical measurements. So how we can estimate reliability? There are three major ways how we can do this. The first one is so-called repeated methods. So basic idea, again, is very simple. You conduct a measurement, then after a certain period of time, you conduct the second measurement and maybe third measurement, and you just compare the results. If they are highly correlated, it shows greater reliability. If the results not correlated, reliability is very low. So it's so-called test-retest reliability. The second measure how we can measure reliability is to examine the relationships among the items themselves at a single point of time. So imagine you have a personality test which measures impulsivity. You have 20 questions asking different about different aspects of being impulsive, different situations, and so on. You can compare those questions actually measure the same construct. So you might, for example, split your 20 questions tests into two halves, 10 and 10, and correlate the results of answers on the first half of the test and the second half of the test. If they're highly correlated, the correlation is high, it means that internal consistency reliability is high. Basically, all the questions with this 20-point scale measure the same construct. But if the results have weak correlation, probably those questions actually ask about different aspects, and maybe they measure 2 or 3 different constructs, and thus internal consistency reliability would be low. It's important to know your scale you're using for measuring certain personality trait measures this exact trait, right? Several traits, only one trait. And to obtain measurements from multiple observers, right? So you can basically compare the results of observation and measurement done by different observers. And again, if the results are almost the same, it says that reliability is high. And if different people got different results, reliability is probably quite low. For example, imagine you would be having an oral exam with 3 different professors answering the same questions. And one professor thinks that you deserve A, the second professor thinks that you deserve B, and the third professor thinks that you deserve C, right? So how it can happen if they heard the same answer you provided to the same questions? Probably they don't have the same standard, right? And that's why there is such a disproportion between their assessments. On the other hand, if like you the same exam, again, you answer the same questions, and all professors think that you deserve the same grade, like A, and only one thinks B, it's mostly reliable, right? So different observers have the same opinion. The problems with measuring reliability also exist. For example, response sets are a problem. Some people, when they, for example, try to complete different tests or measuring different aspects of personality, tend just to answer all the questions the similar way. It happens for a person really not motivated to complete the questionnaire or inventory or test, and they just want to do something and go away. They can answer all the questions yes or no, and obviously it will influence the whole measurement procedure. Another problem from this aspect is like extreme responding. Some people tend to answer like strongly agree or strongly disagree, polar answers, which also influence the overall results of the reliability, measuring reliability. So it's a problem, and sometimes researchers exclude such responses from the database if they see that the person, for example, answered all the questions yes, or all the questions are the polar one. But it requires a lot of attention. If you have a database with hundreds and thousands of participants, it's not always easy to track such responses. Another problem is social desirability. So the basic idea is that people want to be likable and socially attractive. It's who we are, and it's applicable for all of us. And we want to look smart, kind, modest, friendly, and so on. And when people presented with some questions, they don't answer those questions in an honest way. They answer them in a way they think please other people. So it might be questions about, do you throw some garbage, not in a litter can, but just and almost all people done this at least once in their life, but some people just don't admit it because they want to be more likable, and they answer no, of course I didn't, in such type of questions. So it happens quite often, and it can provide distortion in the results, which is not great. So sometimes this problem is treated with inclusion of specific questions in the test, which if a person is honest, the answer should be like no or yes specifically. And if we see that a person answers all those like questions in the wrong ways, that the person probably try to be more socially desirable than usual, and we might do not use his answers in the general database. It's one of the ways how we can deal with this problem, though it might be not always possible to alter the test, or not all tests include this scale of social desirability to measure. Other problems with measuring reliability, so is again, we can provide different recipes how to deal with social desirability. As I said, first of all, we can track social desirability from other responses. Second is make questionnaires, which less susceptible to that. Or we can, for example, use different answer options to alter that. Or, as I said, insert a special social desirability scale, which tracks that exactly. So the second standard of evaluating measurement procedures in personality psychology and psychology in general is validity. Basically, idea is very simple. The test you have should measure what it's designed to measure. So if you develop a test which should measure, for example, narcissism, it should measure narcissism, not extroversion, achievement, motivation, or something else. Sounds simple, but how can you actually determine that the test you're using actually measures what it's designed to measure? So this is a problem, and that's why psychologists develop different types of validity and how we can possibly measure it. So we will discuss 5 types of validity: face validity, predictive validity, convergent validity, discriminant validity, and construct validity. So let's discuss briefly each type. So they described in your textbook in a quite detailed way, but I think you need some additional clarification on this matter. So face validity is whether the test on the surface appears to measure what it's supposed to measure. And we just basically can, for example, read the questions or give those questions to other people, just try to determine it. Not the most important type of validity. Predictive validity or criterion validity is whether the test predicts external criteria. So scales that successfully predict what they should predict have high predictive validity. So it's really hard to create a test with predictive validity because it requires a lot of work. So the basic idea, again, for example, we measure a certain personality characteristics, and if a person scores very high or very low, we can expect a certain life outcome. Simple example is impulsivity. If a person scores high on impulsivity, so they have low self-control skills, we can expect that those people will have more fines for parking. They will have lower credit score, and their GPA at university also would be lower. And research actually shows that. So the connection is quite obvious because people have low self-control, and self-control is essential for following the rules and maintaining routine, which is important for your credit score, your grades, and your parking and driving habits. So most of tests on self-control and impulsivity actually have they have high predictive validity in this respect. It's more complicated for other personality traits, and again, not all tests have this parameter well researched. So because in personality psychology there are hundreds of tests which exist right now, and new tests are created each year. So not all tests have a calculated predictive validity parameter. The third one is convergent validity, the degree to which two measures that theoretically should be related are in fact related. So, for example, let's say 2 personality traits we know, like from research, they have a high positive correlation. So if you create a new test on, for example, extroversion, and you can give it to your participants with another test which measures the second trait, which is highly correlated with extroversion. Nothing comes to my mind right now, but it might be, let's say, achievement motivation, for example, just abstract example. So if we know from the research that extroverts have higher achievement motivation, then our measurement procedures also should show that. And it will show that, yes, our test is valid. So it's convergent validity. Discriminant validity is opposite. So we know that some traits should be independent. They're not correlated. They're not correlated. For example, extroversion is not positively or negatively correlated with other big 5 Traits, let's say neuroticism. So it's two independent traits. And again, if you give a person, you develop new measurement procedure, for example, on extroversion, it should have no correlation with neuroticism. If it has, it means that your test probably less valid because there should be no such correlations there, and thus your discriminant validity is low. And finally, construct validity, a test that measures what it claims to measure, correlates with what it's supposed to correlate with, and does not correlate with what it's not supposed to correlate with. So it's somewhat similar to convergent and discriminant validity, but a bit different. So here the difference is subtle, I would say. In some sense, we can consider construct validity as an integrative characteristic which includes convergent and discriminant validity aspects in itself. And it's basically about like how overall the test measures what it claims to measure and how we measure it through correlations. So the test should correlate with what it should correlate and should have no correlations with what it shouldn't have correlation with. So, and the final assessment criterion is generalizability. So basic idea is that generalizability is the degree to which the measure retains its validity across various contexts. One context of interest might be different groups of people, and the second facet is different conditions. Does a dominance scale, like which measures like how dominant or submissive you are, predict who becomes the leader in business setting as well as is informal after work settings, right? Because people can assert their dominance in different types of relationships. Really is a test which is designed to measure it when one conditions would be showing it in different conditions. So scales have high generalizability to the degree that they applied widely across different people, situations, cultures, and times. So like a perfect generalizability is that you develop, for example, this test which measures dominance, and it will measure it in all people all over the world. It would work across all the countries, in all the times, and all conditions, right? Probably it's not really achievable, but we try to have like higher generalizability we can. So with what we got, with different sources of information, sources of data, and different standards how we assess measurement, we finally need to speak about, to talk about research methods which personality psychologists use. Again, it will utilize your knowledge about research methods in general, which you got from the research methods course, but we need to refresh some information and I guess, again, add some details. So in general, research methods are the strategies, processes, or techniques utilized in the collection of data or evidence for analysis in order to uncover new information or create better understanding of the topic. Right, so it's procedures in which we collect data to get new information or understand better something we already know. So all research methods broadly in psychology can be divided into three big groups: descriptive methods, correlation methods, and experiment. So let's talk about each one. So descriptive methods mostly used on the initial point of research when we don't have much data yet about certain phenomena, personality trait or something, and we just collect some first sets of information. Examples, case studies, in-depth analysis of like one single individual person or group of people, right? We take this somewhat unique case about people who had like an interesting life, or they encountered very specific life conditions, or they had a unique set of personality traits, or they achieved some significant result in something. And we use it to collect information, maybe create some hypothesis for future research. Second very popular technique in this group of methods is naturalistic observation. So it's a recording of the natural behavior. It can be done with using of specific recordings, such as video or audio recordings, or without that. So the basic idea is that we observe people in their like natural settings for educational, working, home, leisure time, and we just observe their behavior, which we try to track and quantify and interpret them. Surveys and interviews also belong to descriptive methods group. So we just ask people questions orally or in written form. We collect their responses and try to analyze them using other techniques. The problem with this group of methods is that the results cannot be generalized, right? So you just collected this data, you know what's happening, but you cannot generalize it to other people, other settings, other cultures, other countries, or age groups. So the second group of methods is correlation. Again, the simple idea is that you measure different variables. Basically, it's anything you can measure in psychology. And then you calculate correlation, trying to determine is there any connection between two variables or not, right? The main limitation is that we can only track that, yes, there is a relationships between variables. For example, a positive correlation when one variable is high, another is also high, or like negative correlation when one variable is high, another is low, right? Or there is no correlation at all, right? So, but we don't know what is the cause and what is the effect. So that is why we often say correlation is not causation. Based on correlational results only, we don't know what is the cause and what is the effect, right? They might be connected through third variable, which we didn't measure in our research. One example is a real case based on really, really large statistical data. We know that there is a strong positive correlation between ice cream consumption and the number of people who drowned. Why? So it seems absolutely illogical and not connected, but actually the real reason behind this correlation is summer. Summer, when it's hot, causes people to buy ice cream, right? Just to cool. And also people use swimming for the same purpose. When they feel hot, they want to swim in a cool lake or river or sea. And usually people drown in summer when they swim, because during the winter time, no one swims because it's too cold. That is the reason why it is correlated, right? So there is no cause and effect relationships between two variables we measure, right? The real cause is what we didn't measure in this research, and it's the season. So that is why correlation is not always like causation. So we should be very careful when we interpret such type of data. And finally, experiment. Here we measure different types of variables. First of all, we have independent variable manipulated by experimenter. It's a factor which we manipulate to affect participants. And dependent variable is the response of the participant. We also measure response to this influence of independent variable. So that's how we basically manipulate situation. Let's imagine like very simple experiment. We want to figure out which studying conditions are better. Is it better to study in a quiet place or a place with some noise? Right? We can randomly assign students to study in more quiet setting and in more loud setting. And loud and quiet setting would be an independent variable. And then we, for example, measure their performance. For example, they read a textbook chapter, and then we conduct a quiz. So the quiz results would be dependent variable. It's their response, which we can measure, and then we can figure out, is there any difference between groups? And if there is a difference, is it really people who studied in the more quiet conditions would show higher results? Right? It would be an example of very, very simple, basic psychological experiment. So the main advantage of the experiment is that it can show what is the cause and what is the effect. And because of that, the results of the experiment can be generalized, which is, again, very important for us as researchers and practitioners who try to implement the results of other people research into their practice, right? The main limitation is that experiment is much harder to organize compared to descriptive and correlational research designs. It's just really harder from organizational point, and some phenomena in psychology much harder to measure, create, and imagine experiment procedure to measure. So thus we can compare these three groups of methods. So again, descriptive methods usually are used to observe and record behavior, right? And we do not manipulate anything here. And thus we have no control over variables. So we just trying to measure what we have. In correlational studies, we try to detect naturally occurring relationships between variables. We collect data on 2, 3 more variables. Again, we cannot manipulate anything, and we cannot specify cause and effect. With experiments, though, we can explore cause and effect relationships. We can manipulate one or several factors. So we manipulate independent variables. And the problem is that results might be not generalizable to all the contexts. Sometimes we have a lot of ethical restrictions, and sometimes it's just really, really hard to conduct. Given all the information we got here, it would be much easier for you to navigate through different series of personality, because you would be able to analyze the data sources they use, research design they use to support their main assumptions and definitions and theory concepts. So you should use this information to get text when you will read about actual different theories in the field of personality psychology. Thank you for your attention for today.